I cannot think of a single time where the BBC said to me, you cannot go because you're a woman, because it's too dangerous. But over these years, I have had other women journalists working for American television networks, for example, would say, my editor wants to send a man instead of a woman.
Those who have gone quite high have done it after a fight. And I would tend to agree that when it comes to, say, picking an editor-in-chief, I do get the impression that not too many women are offered the job.
In Afghanistan, when you want to become a woman journalist, you have to start fighting from home.
Once on a checkpoint, he kept saying, you're a foreign journalist. I was like, no, I'm Syrian. I was speaking in a very Syrian dialect, and he was insisting. I showed him my Syrian ID, and he was like, this is a fake, you're a foreign. Like, why? He said, you can't be a Syrian and a journalist at the same time, and a woman.
A new report by the International Federation of Journalists identifies the Philippines as the second most dangerous place in the world for journalists in the past 25 years. Iraq topped the list with 309 killings, while Mexico placed third.
Why are journalists being killed in the Philippines? Then and now, they're being killed for the same things. They're being killed because people in power want strike fear in a community. And in areas where journalists die, these are also the areas where those in power want to control the laws, want to control the policies, want to control the extraction of natural resources. Pure and simple, they're killed because they stand in the way between the powers that be and the people they want to dominate.
Katarungan para sa mga biktima ng Davao bombing.
Inde Espina Verona has been pushing the boundaries during dictatorial regimes in her country for over 3 decades. In the early years of her journalistic career, media outfits in the Philippines were controlled by the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos. These were critical formative years of resistance and learning for her.
Negros, the province where I came from, is a lush land. It was that kind of rich earth, and it did give riches to very few. We had those great balls and everything, and the lives of the rich and famous, and then you had children literally dying of malnutrition. That's what made our province a perfect place for a journalist to get trained. At the same time, it was also a perfect place for war. It was known as the country's social volcano. I studied AB journalism at the University of the Philippines in Diliman. I dropped out in my second year to go full-time as an activist. I never went back. It was a call to serve full-time, to pour all your energies and all your strengths into the cause of activism and ousting the dictatorship. I joined the alternative media. We called it Cobra Ants. So ang sadya ko talaga as batang mamamahayag was really to try to push the limits of journalism.
Hello, Papa Dude! Yung office namin dati, kasi may highway yun eh, meron kaming fishnet na, as in real, heavy fishnet. Parang nagko-cover from the door, mga siguro mga 5 meters wide, in the hope that pag may tumapon ng granada, makakatch. May sandbags nga, di ba? Naglagas na ng sandbag. Kita namin na nandun talaga kami mga pangalan namin as enemies of the state na nagbibigay sila ng peace and order na council briefing.
May pinagkaiba ba yung pagiging babae sa field, lalo na kapag conflict reporting?
In fairness, these were the 1980s. I have to admit, hindi kami very immersed sa gender issues. We were more immersed in the so-called big picture of war and conflict and all that. I think I became aware of the gender issues when I went to Manila na and I started climbing the ranks and news desks na. Before that, we all thought we were one of the boys. We tried to be one of the boys because to not be one of the boys would be shameful. And I think that was hard to overcome later.
A recent UN study reported that women journalists were open to double attacks, both physical and on social media. Today, when journalists continue to be under constant threat, Inde is a passionate advocate of free media.
Kung ikaw ay nakapag-post at ikaw ay nakuyog at hello, ako ay parang feeling ko minsan na there are times when I wake up, I feel like I'm Miriam Santiago. Yung parang ganon. Makain ka ng threats, no, ganon. Parang, tapos sa inyong patayin ka, ikaw yellow ka na ano ka, kailangan sa'yo mabakbak, ma-rape, lahat na lang, no? Tahimik na lang ba tayo? Ipapaubayan na lang natin sa mga Panginoon ngayon ang social media? Hindi. Kasi tulad ng mundo, tinatayuan natin ngayon, kung anuman ang co-optation na ginagawa ng mga gobyerno, kung anuman ang coercion na ginagawa ng mga gobyerno, and I'm going to go on the record, the Duterte administration is complicit in coercing everybody on social media. This is not about trolls, this is not about people. This is about a government setting the atmosphere for the kind of toxic wasteland that social media is.
Journalism is truth-telling. To pretend to be neutral and blind to what's going on around you, I think that's unnatural.
وانا ما بدي اقعد بالبيت انا وفي بنات بالذات لسه عم بناضلوا وبكافحوا بهذا الجو وما تركوا وما تخلوا.
اليوم جبنا مواد من الريف لحلب.
المعتقل هو مقبرة للأحياء.
The main idea was to document the work of the women who are rebellious and they are still fighting to stay within the rebel-held areas of Syria. I wanted to capture the work of the women on tape. So the girl who's going to be sitting on Google 10 years after now, she can find something visual about the women work. And if the winners men just sat down and start writing our history, they will be forced to include the extreme work that these women have done.
Truth-telling gets even harder in times of conflict. Aleppo, once the home of journalist Zaina Erhaim, is now a war zone. Syria is presently ranked the most dangerous country to report from. 1 in 3 journalists killed in the world is from Syria. In 2016, of the 43 journalists killed, 14 were reporting from Syria. A year ago, Zaina herself had to flee to southern Turkey. Here, she reinvented herself and turned trainer of citizen journalists.
I've never seen myself as a war correspondent. I don't think I'm courageous enough. But sadly, the war came to my own country, to my own home. So I accidentally became a war correspondent. for women, especially working in the conservative societies and communities, that she can't move alone. She always needs a male guardian on her side, especially when she's filming in the streets. So I had to hire my husband as a full-time, free-of-charge fixer. And without him, I wouldn't be able to film anything. Most of the male journalists can easily go to frontline. That's a very masculine space and women cannot access. And while on frontline, they surely are reporting how many barrel bombs have fell, how many people have died, and so on. But women are left behind to actually experience the real life happening. They know what kind of schools are there, what kind of curriculums are given to the children, the situation in the field hospitals, the shortage of gas, so they have to cook on woods, the daily life, the basics.
Her passion for documenting women's stories led her to initiate a blog, turning ordinary women into chroniclers of their troubled history.
Zaina Erhaim, congratulations and welcome to the Peter IAWRT family. You want to pose for, step to the side?
I feel a burden to complete what my colleagues and friends have died for. They died to make the world see what's going on.
So I would ask you kindly to keep your eyes on our stories, because some great people are getting killed for you to just have these stories available. Thank you.
Zaina, already living in exile, was further restricted in her movements. In October 2016, the British authorities seized her passport at the Heathrow airport. Zaina had to wait it out in London with her 8-month-old daughter, Zara.
Working in the jungle, we are not afraid, we're not afraid. Now I have to fight to get any kind of identification from that homeland that until now I am ready to die for. Just for some criminal to decide whether you're good enough to have a passport or a nationality or not.
ముందు నుంచి బొమ్మలు అంటే ఇష్టము, కానీ వేసే అంత తెలిసేది కాదు. ఇంకెట్లా వీళ్ళకి తెలిసేది ఎట్లా, మనం రాసేదానికంటే బొమ్మలు అయితే కొంచెం బాగా ఇంట్రెస్ట్గా చూస్తారని ఏదో మాకు తెలిసిన రీతిలో, మరి అంత పర్ఫెక్ట్గా అయితే వేయలేము, తెలిసిన రీతిలో వాళ్ళకి అర్థమయ్యే విధంగా వేసి వేద్దామనే ఆలోచన వచ్చి మళ్ళీ నేనే మొదలుపెట్టి వేసిన, కొన్ని బొమ్మలు వేసిన.
In India, where caste hierarchies are a norm and men, women and children from so-called lower castes are abused, killed and driven to suicide, a group of Dalit women are rewriting their history. For the last 15 years, they have been bringing out a monthly magazine, Mahila Navodayam, a new dawn for women.
కొంచెం వేరే క్యాస్ట్ వాళ్ళంటే మా తెలియని చోట్లకి వెళితే వాళ్ళేం పెద్దగా పట్టించుకొని, అంటే మేము తెలిసిన వాళ్ళు ఉంటారు కదా చుట్టుపక్కల గ్రామం, వాళ్ళైతే మీరు పలానా వాళ్ళు కదా అనేది ఇళ్ళల్లో కూడా రానిచ్చేవాళ్ళు కాదని. ఇది వచ్చి న్యూస్ వచ్చి వేరే ఆమె రాసింది, బైరెడ్డిపల్లి ఆమె రాసింది న్యూస్, రత్నమ్మది. అక్కడ భూస్వామి వచ్చి దళితుల మీద చెప్పు చూపించినాడు. ఆ చెప్పు చూపించినాడు, ఆ న్యూస్ అట్లే రాసి ఈ బొమ్మ వేసినామన్నమాట. దీనివల్ల కూడా చాలా మార్పు వచ్చింది. ఇది చదివి, నవోదయం చదివి అందరూ తిరగబడ్డము, క్యాస్ట్ ఇష్యూస్ మీద కూడా తిరగబడ్డము, అట్లా చేసినారు.
Most of them are first-generation learners and do everything themselves, from illustrations, reporting, editing to layout. With a 40,000 print order and a readership of more than 200,000, it has even overtaken the statewide readership figures of some leading dailies.
బస్సు ఎక్కుతానే నేను విలేకరు అంటే కండక్టరే నవ్వేవాడు, ఏం మా అంత ఆడవాళ్ళు కూడా ఇప్పుడు విలేకరులుగా చేస్తా అన్నారు అనేసి ఎన్నిసార్లు ఇప్పటికీ నవ్వుతారు తెలియని వాళ్ళు ఉంటే.
Besides exposing caste discrimination, the reporters cover gender, child rights, and livelihood issues of their own communities.
స్టార్టింగ్ నుంచి చాలామంది రిపోర్టర్స్ అంటే 100 మందికి పైగానే వచ్చారు, జాయిన్ అయినారు. ఇప్పుడు ఉన్నది కేవలం 12 మంది మాత్రమే. ఆ 12 మందిలో కూడా స్టార్టింగ్ బ్యాచ్ 24 మందిలో 3 మాత్రమే నిలిచినాము. అంటే మిగతా వాళ్ళంతా ఫ్యామిలీలో అలాంటి సపోర్ట్ లేకపోవడము, భర్తలు అనుమానించడము, ఎక్కడెక్కడో తిరిగేసి వస్తున్నావు, నైట్లో వస్తావు, అలాంటి సమస్యలు ఫేస్ చేయడం వల్ల వాళ్ళందరూ మధ్యలో డ్రాప్ అయిపోయినారు. మాకు అలాంటి ప్రాబ్లం లేదు, ఫుల్ ఎంకరేజ్మెంట్ ఉంది. నేను రాత్రి 10 గంటలకు వచ్చినా బస్ దగ్గర కాసుకొని ఉండి బస్ దిగుతానే తీసుకొస్తారు నన్ను ఇంటికి.
నవోదయం బుక్స్ తరఫున హైదరాబాద్లో మీటింగ్కి వచ్చి అక్కడ ముఖ్యమంత్రి తరఫున అవార్డు తీసుకొచ్చారు. సంవత్సరం బయట మీటింగ్ జర్నలిస్ట్ మీటింగ్ పెడతారు కదా, అక్కడికి వెళ్ళేస్తూ ఉంటారు. చాలా హ్యాపీగా ఉంటుంది నాకు.
The magazine has inspired a new generation of Dalit women to join its editorial team, and their newfound confidence continues to challenge caste hierarchies.
వచ్చేసిన తర్వాత ఇక్కడ ఫస్ట్ టైం కాలేజీకి వెళ్ళింది ఎవరంటే నేనే. ఈ ఊర్లో ఫస్ట్ ఏదన్నా చిన్న జాబ్ అయినా స్టార్ట్ చేసింది కూడా నేనే. ఈ ఊర్లో కూడా మేమంటే కొద్దిగా అంటే పట్టదండి. మేము ఒక ఫ్యామిలీనే, దళిత ఫ్యామిలీ అనమాట. అందుకనేసి మేము కొంచెం హై లెవెల్లో ఎడ్యుకేషన్లో హై లెవెల్లో ఉన్నామంటే వీళ్ళకి చాలా ఇదన్నమాట.
I feel greatly honored by this award, but I also feel deeply resentful and angry at having been attacked, intimidated, and having to leave the town that I considered my home. You know, the indigenous Adivasi community in Bastar, they are subjected to fake arrests, fake surrenders, and killings in fake encounters. And the most heinous of crimes, sexual assault and rape of Adivasi women and girls by the security forces. Now, as journalists struggle to bring this forth, the state government of Chhattisgarh just used appalling methods to silence all voices that were supporting the local Adivasis to fight human rights abuse. The press has been under constant attack for doing its job. Reporters have been arrested with trumped-up charges, and I was driven out of Bastar. And the government of India watched, doing nothing.
In November 2016, Indian journalist Malini Subramaniam received the International Press Freedom Award, one of 4 international journalists to be picked for courageous reporting from a conflict zone by the CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists. India ranks 9th among the 20 deadliest countries in the world to report from. 40 Indian journalists have been killed between 1992 to 2016. Malini reports from Chhattisgarh state on human rights violations on the largely tribal community living there. Chhattisgarh has been the epicenter of a civil war between the state security forces and the Naxalites, an ultra-left group. With 42% forest cover, the state is rich in natural resources. The tribals allege that in the name of development, the state is displacing them from their ancestral land. The tribals, like the journalists reporting on them, are caught between the police, the paramilitary, and the Naxalites.
The truth gets somewhere lost in the milieu of information that is being provided. So the police wants to put up a certain kind of information. The Maoists want to put up a certain kind of information. Yeah? So as reporters, when you go, people will wonder what information should we give. Yeah? Is she with the police, or is she with the Maoists, or is she with... so you, to establish yourself as somebody who's independent, doesn't matter which version, but what actually happened, you need to say that. As a journalist, they would also ask, आपको कैसा पता चलता है कि यहाँ पे ऐसा हुआ है? When you say, I have sources of information which I have to protect, they would say, oh, so probably she's getting her information from the Maoists. No?
Askina vatta pinne vas me vatta gakgun. Adani vatta ni me vattar. Motorcykel kan gar vattar.
ऐसे मतलब पीछे आए थे ऐसे बांध ले गए
ऐसा बांध के उनको लेके गए
जी
अच्छा
मारते मारते ले गए
अच्छा और उनकी पत्नी भी यहीं पे थी
जी यहीं पर थी
पुलिस आई थी पूरा तहकीकात
नहीं आई नहीं
कुछ तहकीकात कुछ नहीं हुआ
नहीं
in Bastar, given the situation of conflict there, everything gets suspended. Yeah? The basic rights get suspended, and that is dangerous. In 2015, I covered the story. One of my very, very poignant shot was of the father, and we were in the Sarpanch's house. I remember him, he was leaning on the wall and he said, गाँव वाले सब साथ देंगे, सरपंच भी साथ देंगे, वो जानते हैं मीना माओवादी है ही नहीं, मीना के साथ जो हुआ गलत हुआ और सब न्याय के लिए लड़ेंगे, पूरी गांव खड़ी है हमारे साथ. And so saying, he just looked up like that and just slid down, helplessly was sliding down. Then he went and sat there. It was terrible.
In early February 2016, Malini's home was attacked by a front organization of a right-wing Hindutva group. She was forced to move to another city, another state.
They had formed a kind of a vigilant group called the Samajik Ekta Manch, and one day they just barged into my house and started asking me questions about who I am, why am I doing this, how long have you been living here? And I was a little surprised because I've been living here for the last 5 years. Then the visits from the police started, where they started asking me details about my stay, about who my landlord is. They had to find a way of building pressure on me to leave. So all that made it difficult for me to live there with my daughter who was going to a school there. In fact, when we had to come out, she couldn't appear for exams. It was immediately the next month, and it was so painful to just pull her out of her school in that manner.
Malini may have been pushed out of her home in Chhattisgarh, but she unfailingly returns to report from the same region. According to the CPJ, 1,233 journalists have been killed during the last 24 years, 52 journalists every year. War-torn Afghanistan has been one of the country's worst hit.
During the years, I received a lot of threats because of the news that we broadcasted from the radio station, and people were not happy with that. This was different people. Sometimes was Taliban, sometimes was government, sometimes was police, sometimes was the parliament member. I know a number of women journalists that they graduated from Faculty of Journalism, but they become teachers. Why? Because they know this is very risky.
Veteran radio journalist Najiba Ayubi co-founded the Afghan Independent Media Consortium and the Freedom of Expression Initiative. In the post-Taliban years, as a young woman journalist, Najiba drove from province to province, starting radio stations for her group. Some of these were bombed by the Taliban, but Najiba and her team ensured that transmissions were uninterrupted.
One time I remember I raided by a commander of Kabul police. Policeman fired on a student of school. The head of Kabul police arrived later than our reporter. When he arrived and saw my reporter in the area, said, "Why you're coming before me?" And my reporter said, "See, I just did my job. You come late, but I come on time." And he was not happy with that, and he captured all the journalistic equipment from my colleague. And my colleague called me. I said, "Don't worry, you have something very good in your hand, and it is your telephone." Then I went to the studio and we broadcast that news, and my reporter told everything. After 10 minutes, I received a call from the head of Kabul police. He told me, "Najiba, don't broadcast this news." I said, "No, we broadcast it and we will broadcast more." He threatened me many times, and during his threats, he used some sentence which I never forgot that. He said, "Najiba, please remember you are a woman." And I never forgot this sentence because it had somehow very strong threat to me. I said, "Yes, I remember I'm a woman, but I'm doing my job and this is my job."
Sexual harassment is a growing worry for women journalists the world over. Afghanistan is no exception.
There was a report raised by some of organizations which are defending journalists. They mentioned 60% women in Afghanistan have experience of sexual harassment in their workplace. And also the other thing, which is their salaries are not equal in many media organizations. There is a difference between the income of a man journalist and a woman journalist. Somehow they are not taking serious the woman journalist.
From the front lines in Afghanistan to the front lines in Cameroon, women journalists continue to report on the civil strife that threatens to rupture their societies. In 2015, the kidnapping of schoolgirls by the Boko Haram in Nigeria had stunned the world. Till today, many of these girls continue to be held hostage.
Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. C'est avec beaucoup de plaisir que nous vous retrouvons encore ce jour pour une autre édition de Bas les Masques.
Head of the state-owned Cameroon Radio and Television, Musa Marandata anchors Bale Mask, or Unveiling the Truth. In her special broadcast, Musa has been consistently focusing on the spell of terror in Nigeria, Cameroon and other neighboring countries.
Les filles et les femmes du Grand Nord Cameroun sont en train de payer un lourd tribut à cette guerre que nous faisons, à cette guerre que nous a imposée Boko Haram. Parce que vous voyez, elles sont un peu stigmatisées parce que les kamikazes, dans 90% des cas, sont des femmes. Sont des femmes dont du coup, elles sont stigmatisées. Et surtout, vous voyez, le petit commerce est très florissant dans la région de l'extrême nord. Et ce sont en majorité les femmes, les filles qui font ce petit commerce-là. Et on sait aussi que les kamikazes, pour la plupart, surtout pour les premiers cas d'attaque, hein, c'était des petites filles qui donnaient l'impression d'être des petites vendeuses et puis au fond qui avaient des bombes.
According to the United Nations, 44 children have been used for suicide attacks in 2015 alone, 3/4 of them girls. Last year, children were used in half the attacks in Cameroon. Across the region, about 1.3 million children have been displaced. 1,800 schools have been closed down because they have been damaged, looted or burnt. Visits to refugee camps are a frequent part of Musa's field beats. Zamai is one of the camps where internally displaced persons have found temporary refuge. Life here offers little comfort, and Musa is keen to bring these conditions before her audience.
Parfois, les autorités administratives estiment qu'on ne doit pas tout dire. On ne doit pas tout dire. Parfois, ils nous disent, mais attendez, ça c'était une attaque mineure. Est-ce qu'on a besoin de médiatiser tout ça? Vous savez, quand vous médiatisez ce genre de petites situations, entre guillemets, ça sème la panique. Mais nous avons une autre responsabilité, c'est porter à la connaissance du public tout ce qui se passe. Il n'y a pas de petite attaque.
Prejudices against women journalists are the norm, but Musa leads by example.
Les premières attaques, ils avaient tendance à nous dire qu'est-ce qu'une femme vient chercher au beau milieu de la nuit, dans un milieu comme celui-ci, ce n'est pas le vôtre, madame. Et c'est à ce moment-là seulement que je commence à prendre conscience de ce que je suis une femme. Parce que ma réaction, c'est la réaction d'un reporter, c'est la réaction d'un responsable. Donc je leur dis, ben, moi je suis là en ma qualité de journaliste, en ma qualité de responsable des médias dans la région. Donc oubliez le fait que je sois une femme. Donnez-moi l'information, c'est tout ce qui m'intéresse et pas autre chose.
She goes beyond gender barrier to give equal opportunity to everybody. And this is how when I arrived in Marwa in July 2015, we had a series of explosions in Marwa and other parts of the far north region. She did not say I was a woman to keep me behind. She said, go, go. And I had one of the most challenging experiences in my career to go to the war front, to cover explosions, to go so close to terrorist groups.
Je suis plutôt bien acceptée, contrairement à ce que les gens pourraient se dire. Je suis plutôt bien acceptée. C'est vrai qu'au départ, je faisais l'objet d'une curiosité. Donc, c'était un phénomène nouveau. Mais là, maintenant, ça va, il n'y a pas de souci. C'est vrai que bon, certains hommes, certaines autorités masculines n'ont pas toujours intégré ça. Vous côtoyez les gens tous les jours, mais lorsqu'ils vous écrivent, ils écrivent monsieur. Le réflexe est là. Parce que dans leur tête, ils n'ont pas encore intégré qu'une femme puisse occuper cette fonction-là.
Découvrir le centre.
Covering conflict often comes with a strong human dimension. Sometimes journalists build relationships with the people whose stories they tell.
Just how different the mood is here.
Lise Doucet, BBC's chief international correspondent, experienced this during a chance reunion with a Syrian refugee family in Canada. She had spent several weeks with them while covering the refugee crisis in Damascus.
It was such a moment of sweet serendipity. For me, it was as if this one family who were so happy to be in Canada was a story of hope for the rest of the refugee crisis. It was an affirmation for them that that dark chapter in Damascus was over.
QRSTUV.
The rules of journalism have changed in a world where terrorism has a totally different avatar.
There was one time in the early 1990s where the Afghan Mujahideen had scored a very important victory in the east of Afghanistan. I was the BBC Pakistan correspondent then. And they called up the BBC office and said, we've taken Hust and we would like the BBC to cover it. And I said, great, I'll be coming. And they said, there was a pause and they said, oh, we want the BBC, but sorry, no women can come. The commander has said that there's no way. And this was Jalaluddin Haqqani, who now, of course, has passed away, but he's on the terrorism watch list now. And so quickly I just said, okay, fine, I'll come, but I'll dress like a man. And they said, okay. So I went and dressed, in the shalwar kameez, and I put my hair up in the hat. But when the moment came for the press conference in the hills of North Waziristan, is I'm sitting right next to the commander because, of course, they knew I was a woman and I should be given the place of privilege. And so that's the kind of compromises they make that we ended up, I got the story, they got the BBC coverage, and actually it was quite a dangerous trip. We got chased by helicopter gunships, but it showed a kind of pragmatism, hospitality over ideology. In the case of Western women, we often said you were treated as a third gender. You weren't treated like the women of their country and culture, but you weren't treated like the men. In some ways, you were rather this curious kind of person that they hadn't come across in their own society. And you were a journalist, but you were also a woman. And my own experience was one of always of respect and openness, and sometimes out of sheer curiosity, you would actually get the interview before the man. Sometimes it was an advantage to be a woman rather than a man.
The rules of engagement have also been turned on their head, especially for women journalists.
The big fear, of course, for journalists is one of kidnapping, especially with groups such as the so-called Islamic State, because their savagery is beyond compare. We do know throughout history that extremist groups have kidnapped people, but the kind of things we've seen now with the videoed beheadings, the keeping people in dungeon, treating them like animals, and of course sexual attacks as well. We've heard the stories about the rapes, but I think women in particular fear this because because the sexual attacks against women are more predominant than they are against men.
Blockbuster release,
Panama Papers.
The documents were leaked to the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung.
We turn now to the banking bombshell causing shockwaves around the world.
Edward Snowden calling it the biggest leak in the history of data journalism.
We need months of research, of fact-checking, of really digging into these files in order to find those stories of public interest that are going to make an impact on society.
The Panama Papers investigation, which blew the lid on offshore shell accounts of the rich and powerful, has been described as the most ambitious data journalism project of this century. 4.8 million emails, 2.1 million PDFs spread over a 38-year time frame from 1977 to 2015. 300 journalists from over 80 countries jointly worked on the biggest digital data dump that revealed dirty money of corrupt politicians to convicted criminals. Over a third of the investigative journalists were women. Just a decade back, such a scenario would have been impossible. The Washington-based International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, ICIJ, initiated this cross-border collaborative investigation.
When ICIJ started 19 years ago, it was predominantly male. I think that probably women were, who knows, maybe 10% of the network. And over the year, that demographic has changed dramatically all over the world. I know that we made an effort to include as many women as possible, not just because we want to check a box, but because we know that women do make a huge difference in this kind of global and large-scale collaborations. More and more women are leading investigative teams in countries around the world, from Peru to Finland to Germany. They are not only more involved and more engaged in investigative reporting, but they are leading their teams. For example, Milagros Salazar in Peru, she's leading a team called Convoca, which is bringing people together in Spanish. And Convoca has become one of the top media organizations for investigative reporting in Peru.
In India, Ritu Sareen was handpicked to be the lead investigator.
I
doubt if in terms of expanse there'll ever be a story like this again. In the sense, not just the volume, of the size of the data, but the kind of people who are involved, from politicians to heads of state and government and their relatives to celebrities, film stars, sports persons. So it was extremely challenging. The security aspect plus verification. We did physical verification of each and every person we wrote about throughout the country. This was an investigative story of data crunching, where women have never sort of stood out. So I think that was interesting. Now that I look back and reflect, I was working with two other people of my paper who are very strong on data and business and, reading balance sheets and all that. But I think I matched them and I did an okay job.
Statistics reveal that more than war or conflict, it is for reporting on human rights violations, politics, and corruption that journalists are marked and killed. In 2016, 73% of the journalists killed were in this category. Some of the women journalists involved in the Panama Papers investigation paid a high price for speaking truth to power.
Many of these women who worked in the Panama Papers, they live in societies that are incredibly repressive. Let's think about the case of Khadija Ismail in Azerbaijan. Khadija just spent months in a prison for reporting about the offshore wealth of the president of her country. Before she was sent to prison, she had to suffer a number of other forms of harassment, including illegally recording in her own house and then making those recordings of her intimate and private life available in the internet as a way to pressure her. There is nothing left for them to try. Khadija remains a shining light in Azerbaijan.
Cordillera is home to 3 of the largest mining companies in the Philippines. It is being tapped by the national government for both hydroelectric and geothermal power, displacing large numbers of indigenous people. Kimberlie Ngabit Quitasol is a journalist who writes for a leading daily, the Philippines Daily Enquirer. She also works with an all-women team for a community newspaper, Nordis.
Nordis is more focused on the take of the grassroots, on the issues on indigenous peoples. For Nordis, we want the wider public to understand why these people are protesting. Because from an outsider, you would say that they are just against development. But if you go to the communities and you really see how these projects would impact their lives, then if you were living in that community, you would understand why they would protest such projects. It's like a story that has a template that you just change the name, the number of victims. It comes to a point when you get frustrated that it seems like it's becoming too common as the vehicular accidents. But then, as a journalist, you have to persist in telling these stories. You owe it to these people who have been unjustly killed or unjustly treated.
Every edition is brought out these days under threat and intimidation from the ruling regime.
Some of the staff of Nordis received text messages harassing them about the reports that they've been doing.
Kasi siyempre hindi ko na sinagot.
Mas tatanungin ako kung kilala ko naman daw yung mga NPA na taga-uma, ganyan. Pangasim man ta, ibaga medyo kasinsin ko nga, di ay NPA nga di ay tabumaba. Kuno, ha? Wow! Hindi ko na sinagot kasi.
O tapos dahil doon di ka na magsusulat?
Hindi kasi, charing. Na-stress ako sa kanya.
Na-stress ka sa kanya.
The Northern Dispatch Weekly, as a newspaper, has been listed as among the fronts of the New People's Army. So could you imagine your paper being tagged? Not just the staff, but the entire paper tagged as a front of a rebel group.
There is no way to know that the next victim would be a journalist. Sa karamihan, prangka-prangka, may nagawa yan. Kasi hindi ka naman talaga papatayin dyan kung wala kang ginawa.
The president is wrong when he said that journalists are being killed because they are corrupt. Journalists, like many other workers, are underpaid and overworked. So, they are very vulnerable to corrupt practices. And who corrupts who? Who has the money to corrupt? I mean, who holds the power to corrupt? But this is not an excuse for us journalists to engage in corrupt practices. Neither it is an excuse for anybody to kill a journalist.
I always had this dream that I wanted to go back to Bangladesh sometime and work there. We talked about this actually very recently, a year before he was killed. I don't think I am welcome or I will be protected if I go back to Bangladesh now. You know, FBI keeps a pretty close touch with me for my safety. And also here even, I have been told to keep my exact location anonymous. I am Rafida Bonya Ahmed. I normally write with the name Bonya Ahmed. And I am a Bangladeshi, I guess American author and editor of the blog Muktomona, which was founded by Avijit in 2001. Muktomona stood for free speech, free thinking. It provided a platform for people to express their views, which wouldn't be otherwise impossible in mainstream media or any other media in Bangladesh.
Over the last 2 decades, Bangladesh has seen a growing rise in fundamentalism. Writers, journalists, bloggers risk their lives for their stand taken against religious bigotry. Bangladesh ranks 14 among the 20 deadliest countries to report from.
This is called Bishashir virus, virus of faith. This is the book which actually created a lot of controversy and brought him to the limelight of the terrorists.
In February 2015, Bonya Ahmed and her husband Avijit Roy visited Dhaka to attend the annual book fair. The trip was the costliest in their lives.
So we walked out of the book fair around 8:30, holding hands. We were actually joking about eloping because we're saying, he said, "Oh, we are eating our aunt's cooking for dinner every night. Let's just pretend. Let's just elope." or let's go eat somewhere else and then we can go home later and pretend that we are not hungry, and we're holding hands and we're walking. And that's actually the last memory I have. And I have looked at those pictures online right after we were hacked. Avijit lying on the street, and I am asking for help, or I'm actually trying to lift Avijit, smeared in blood, and I had blood all over. Now I know that I had a sliced off finger. I had four, 5, 6 inches long machete stabs on my head, and I actually grabbed the machetes with my hand.
Since the murder of Avijit Roy, at least 8 Bangladeshi atheists and gay rights campaigners have been killed by Islamic extremists, their intent being to silence dissenting voices with guns and knives.
When they attacked us, Al-Qaeda of Indian subcontinent or Ansarullah Bahini, they did mention that Muktomona created a huge impact in the young community in Bangladesh. People actually got the courage to express themselves, express their views against religion. In one side, we're getting hacked to death, and on the other side, the government is actually arresting these so-called atheist bloggers for hurting religious feelings. They have actually used ICT Act 57 against a lot of journalists, a lot of writers, for speaking out against even the government, maybe a minister or a powerful political person. 100,000 fundamentalist religious people marched into the street of Dhaka in 2013, demanding the persecution of the atheist bloggers. It's almost like, the atheists are coming. The journalists as a whole face a lot of threats, but the female journalists actually get, threats, and the fear of getting harassed is like one notch even higher. Since the attack, it took me 3 months to recover, and since then I have been working for these bloggers to help them in the country to find safe shelters. I have been at the UN for briefings in Geneva, in New York. I have also pleaded to the British government, Dutch governments, US government, Canadian government. I could not leave my co-warriors in the middle of the battlefield. After everything has happened, all the loss, all the injuries, all of my, sleepless nights, my insomnia, and the PTSD watch that I have been put in, I still think I am privileged. I have this platform to speak up. Why should I just waste it? Why shouldn't I take advantage of that as part of my little existence, which is so meaningful to me. Could be meaningless to the universe, but very meaningful to me. I don't know how much impact I'll be able to make. It doesn't really matter as long as I continue to do what I believe in and what I think is right.